Hi folks. In the coming weeks, we're going to get a little bit more in depth into the professional environment and what expectations are when you get on the job. And part of that is the ability to create compiled style sheets with a preprocessor. Now, I'm going to show you less this week and SAS next week. Right now, I'm going to give you a couple links that you can go to. As we look at this page, you'll see use with Node.js. It says npm install -gless. That's if you have a command prompt or a terminal, but I'm not even going to get into that just yet. I want to focus on the idea of why you want to do this. Now, less and SAS are going to be very similar. And basically, you're going to make your approach a little bit differently, but it's going to be far more dynamic. You'll see that as you go forward with these syntactically compiled style sheets, that a few lines of code, when processed, will turn into a lot of lines of code. So you can write less code and be more productive. So the two sites I have up right now are lesscs.org, which is the homepage for Less, and I have winless.org/online less compiler. Both these links will be surrounded by this video, but the idea is you can come in here and you can create variables just like this. Okay. So for now, I'm just going to use this online compiler so you see what happens. So first we're looking at a variable, which is the @ symbol, and it says border width 1 pixel. So when I write div header like this and I put border with that variable, you'll see that it makes it 1 pixel. Solid, and then the reddish color, which is this. But in the attachment, I have a bunch of files here, and this is the files in your zip file. And I'm going to open up the first one, and I'm going to just look in right here. And what we have here is the same sort of thing that you just saw. So when you take this and copy it and put it right inside this section, you'll see it immediately processes into this background color and color there. So just getting a good idea for this, why would we use this? Well, let's take your final projects. You're going to be asked to produce a style guide. And that style guide might have a bunch of colors that are repetitive. So the concept would be to create a variable for that color, and then just call the variable when you need it, and call the text when you need it. So this right here opens up all sorts of opportunities. If you had the JavaScript course or even the PHP courses, you might know what a variable is. It's something that holds a value and can be reused. Well, right here you don't see too much of an increase in efficiency, do you? You see, well, the paragraph tag is 3 lines, so is the UL, and so is the list item. But as we get further, and we start reusing this, once we get into mix-ins, you'll see that we're going to amplify our ability to be dynamic and efficient. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the next one, which is mixin.less, and here you see a problem where you might have multiple circles on a page. Now what a mixin is when we take the value of the circle and reuse it. So right here you might see something like a hashtag circle that has, when it has a border radius of 100%, you know it's a circle. And this is just the color, no big deal. But let's say we wanted to have a smaller circle and still inherit the properties of the parent circle. Well, all we have to do with a mixin is put in hashtag circle, and we will mix in the properties of that initial value. So it makes you think when you create your style guides and you start an approach of things that you'll be reusing. And if we take our projects for this course in the next 6 weeks, we want to be as professional as possible and come up with concepts for doing online compiling. So here we go. You'll see that small circle has the mixin right there, and the big circle has the same mixin right here. So these are attributes for a circle, and then we have different size circles. So now you're starting to see that, okay, this is good. With a mixin, I can take all those properties, and we've turned 2, 4, 6 lines of code into 2, 6, 10 lines of code. But it's a variable, granted. But the approach is definitely a professional idea, because if you have these reusable components, there's no point in running this. So how does this work? Well, usually in the process you'll be coding less and it would compile automatically, provided you have the tools. Like for me, I use a few different tools for this, and I'm on a Mac right now, and I'll use Ruby to repetitively compile my style sheets. So you'll see when we look this week, we're looking at less, but next week we'll do SAS, and they're very, very familiar. They're going to be very similar. So I'm going to hide this again, and that was your first Mixin, which is kind of fun. Now this is number 3, which is Mixin no rule. And in here, you're going to see that the only difference between this and the last one is this, the parentheses. And all that means is when I do this and remove the parentheses, circle appears again. So when I refresh with this, you'll see the Mixin with no rule means that we're not using circle. It's just built as a supplier of properties to things that will inherit those properties. So now we've got reusable Mixin with no rules, which is another fun thing. So let's go forward a little bit. We're in number 3. There's only 8 of these things, so I'll make sure I didn't want to repeat anything, so this is 8. So the next one is Mixin with a parameter. Now, if you've ever done JavaScript functions or PHP functions, you know that you're passing parameters to arguments. This is going to be very similar. You're passing arguments to functions. So look at the difference here. We have no rule, but we're also having a default size, and that size is 25 pixels. So when I do this, and I have my typical circle properties, and I have width, its height, and at size and at size, that's the default. However, like for example, smallest circle would be 25 pixels. That's because size is 20 pixels. We're inheriting all the properties of this Mixin. But because I have this parameter in here, I can override that simply by saying circle 100 pixels. And here you see the big circle is modifying these. So it's very much like scripting languages. Both PHP and JavaScript are very similar when they send values to functions. But this is a kind of a unique, smart idea. So if you get into the frame of mind of doing this, you're going to get better at a lot of things. You're going to have a nice fundamental understanding of how efficient coding should go. All right, so that was Mixin parameters. And this is going to be Mixin nesting. Now, we've seen user lists. In fact, this week is lists in the textbook. You know, and we might see something like this, which is fine. It does what it does. But the fact is that when we have this, we can actually embed the LI so it'll be on this specific UL. And what you see is this. You just write this one UL, modify the LIs in it, and next thing you know, you have UL LI when it processes. So again, you're just getting used to this. And these scripts are going to look very similar when we cover SAS. Now, which should you use, SAS or less? Each company is going to have its own thing, its own style, but they're so similar that you can jump from one to the other. So my hope is that for these final projects, you go and start practicing with Lesson SAS and then add it to your resumes or your LinkedIn portfolios. This next one is called Mixin Scope, and this one has a very interesting effect. So if I write this, I have a text color that's this, and we call it here. Okay. So look at UL. UL has text color 0, but LI right here, it's overridden. Isn't that interesting? Because our text color has been overridden inside the UL, and since the LI is a child of that, that color is going to be white. Isn't that interesting? So it follows almost the same rules that JavaScript follows as far as variable scope. When you're inside a function, you can override a variable that's declared outside. But I don't want to confuse you if you haven't had JavaScript before. But this is a nice benefit of overriding a variable within a certain selector. Okay, so that's number 6, Mixin Scope. Only a couple more here. And this is how we can actually do operations. Now, again, this is very similar to JavaScript because we can do operations on values that have like a width that ends in a pixel. Right here, 100 pixels, px. If you have experience with programming, you'll say, I can't perform math on that. That's a string and it has the letters px. But the fact is you can, and here's an example. If we have div right here, height and width, that's fine. But left is going to have the div width, which is 100 pixels. But the actual math in the background color is performed in the hexadecimal. What originally was 03A9F4 has now become 004590, and in this case the div width, which was originally 100 pixels, now becomes 200 pixels. So it ignores the fact that there's px after it and treats it like a value and then adds to it. Now this is just an introduction to less. As you go further, you're going to want to go into a lot more values that you see here, like variables, mixins, parametric mixins. Those are all things that are steps you want to go through. All right, lastly, functions. We can actually run functions on less. So how do we do this? Well, in this case, we're going to paste a variable that's a certain color, and this background color is that variable. But right here, I can say, okay, and hover, and what's going to happen is it's going to take the and make it the div. Again, this is nested, and it's going to fade out that variable, which is RGB, over into 50%, which is 0.5. So it's taking that color at 50% with the fade out function and treating it as it is raw CSS. So is it learning something new? Yes, it is, but it's not to the point where you don't need to worry too much about it. The concept is you want to be ready. I can tell you that I took a course, actually a test for a front-end position last summer, and they gave me a very complicated layout to code. And what they were specifically looking at was my ability to implement mix-ins in a complicated layout. So that was, and I had a sort of a hint because I'm friends with people who work there, and they told me what they were going to be looking for. That was with a company called Kaiser Permanente, which is a healthcare system. But it's just good to know what people ask for in a job interview, and that's what they wanted. They wanted me to use mix-ins extremely efficiently. So the next step, what I would recommend is going through this Endless compiler, go through these things, and don't commit to it yet. Wait for the SAS lesson. And when you get the SAS lesson, you can start to see similarities and form connections in your brain about how you might proceed moving forward in the course and in your career.